Okay, so imagine this. You've got Carol. She's a flight instructor,
Mm-hmm.
and she's with Jacob, a new pilot.
Uh-huh.
And Jacob's about to try flying a tailwheel airplane for the very first time.
Right.
Now, these planes, they're a little different, right? They have that small wheel in the back
Yeah.
instead of up front.
Interesting.
And Carol's showing Jacob why these planes have this tendency to swing their nose around during takeoff.
Mm.
She's using a model airplane propeller and a desk lamp.
Oh, cool. So she's like,
Yeah, so she moves the prop, and the shadow it makes on the desk shows how the angle changes when the tail lifts off the ground.
I see.
It's a really smart way to show what can be kind of a tricky concept to grasp.
Yeah, I can see that. Especially when you're trying to picture it.
Right.
What I find really interesting there is how Carol jumps right into a visual demonstration.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just talking in theory.
Yeah.
She's using a real object, a model, to make this aerodynamic principle come alive.
Uh-huh.
It's called precession, and it's what causes that swing, or what we call yawing tendency.
Uh-huh.
That shadow from the prop under the light, it becomes this symbol, right? It bridges the gap between just explaining it with words and actually seeing how it works.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Mm.
And this little scene that we're picturing, it actually sets the stage for what we're going to be looking at today.
Okay.
Effective communication.
Makes sense.
Especially when you're teaching something where being clear and understanding each other is super important, not just for doing things right, but for safety too.
I see where you're going with this.
So think about it. In aviation, really getting it isn't just about passing some test.
Right.
It's about everyone being safe.
You got it.
So our deep dive today comes from the FAA's Aviation Instructor's Handbook.
Oh, a classic.
And this handbook, it gives us a really clear way to understand how communication actually works.
I'm all ears.
It boils down to three main parts. They're often called the three pillars of communication.
3 pillars. Okay.
So first up, you have the source. That's whoever's sending the message.
Right. Like in our little scenario, that'd be Carol, the instructor. Gotcha. So what makes a good source? What does the handbook say about that?
Well, it emphasizes how important the language they use is.
That makes sense. If you're using all kinds of jargon and technical terms, people won't understand you.
Precisely. Like, imagine if Carol started throwing around all these aviation acronyms like ADs, TCDS, STCs, with a student who's just learning the basics of aircraft maintenance.
Right.
Or terms like ILS, TCS taught us so, with Jacob, who's brand new to flying.
Yeah, they'd be totally lost.
It'd be like they were speaking completely different languages.
I can see that.
The message just wouldn't get through.
So choosing your words carefully, avoiding all that unnecessary jargon, that's key.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just the words themselves. It's about the person delivering them to.
Okay. How so?
The source they need to project confidence
Right.
and convey how important the information is.
Mm-hmm.
Make it clear that the listener really needs to understand it.
Like if Carol sounded unsure when she was explaining that yawing tendency, Jacob might not realize how important it is.
You got it. And then there's this other crucial aspect for the source.
What's that?
Having accurate and up-to-date information.
Oh, of course. That's crucial.
If Carol was explaining something that's outdated or just plain wrong.
Right. It wouldn't just be useless. It could actually be dangerous.
Exactly. So keeping the information current and making it engaging,
yeah,
that helps keep the receiver's attention and builds trust.
Makes sense. So that's the source. What about the next pillar?
All right, so the second pillar, that's the symbols.
The symbols.
It's basically the message itself.
Okay, I'm following.
So the words that Carol uses, her hand, gestures, even that model propeller and desk lamp.
Visual aids.
All of that falls under symbols.
Interesting. So it's not just about the words themselves, but how they're presented.
Exactly. The handbook says that communication relies on these codes.
Okay. Like our shared vocabulary, the gestures we all understand.
Right. But for more complex ideas, you need to arrange these symbols in a way that makes sense.
Like building sentences.
Yeah, and putting together explanations that are clear and complete.
So it's like taking those basic building blocks and constructing something meaningful with them.
And what's really fascinating is how people process these symbols differently.
What do you mean?
Well, some people, they learn best by seeing things.
Visual learner.
Right. Others by hearing explanations.
Auditory.
And then you have those who learn best by doing things.
Hands-on kinesthetic learners.
Exactly.
Right.
And this is where Carol, using that model, really shines.
Right. Instead of just describing it, she shows Jacob what happens.
And the handbook actually has another great example.
Oh, what is it?
It talks about adjusting the trim in an airplane.
Okay.
The instructor can move the trim wheel while the learner feels how the controls change.
I see. So you're engaging multiple senses.
Exactly. You've got sight, sound, and touch.
That's smart. It must make it much easier to remember.
Think about learning to ride a bike.
Ah,
You can read about it all you want, but until you feel that balance,
right. You don't truly get it.
it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So using different sensory channels,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really powerful way to teach.
It makes the information stick better.
And it helps reach people with different learning styles.
So that's the source, the symbols. What's the third pillar then?
The third pillar is the receiver.
The receiver. That would be Jacob in our example, right?
Yeah, Jacob, the student pilot. And for our purposes right now, that's you listening.
Oh, that's cool. Bringing it back to the audience.
And for communication to be truly effective, the source really needs to understand the receiver.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do they do that?
Well, first they need to consider the receiver's abilities.
You mean their existing knowledge and skills?
Right. Like Jacob's familiarity with aviation is probably going to be different from someone who's grown up around airplanes.
True. A good instructor would need to figure out that starting point.
Exactly. And it's not just what they know, it's also their attitude.
Hmm.
Are they resistant to the information?
Right.
Are they eager to learn? Or somewhere in between?
That would definitely change how Carol would teach Jacob.
Absolutely. And then their prior experiences play a role too.
Oh, interesting. How so?
The handbook says that adults learning to fly, they're often very motivated,
Uh-huh.
and they bring all sorts of knowledge and experiences with them.
So Carol could actually use that to her advantage.
Yeah, like if Jacob has an engineering background,
Right.
she might explain things differently than if he didn't.
That makes a lot of sense. So understanding those abilities,
Mm.
attitudes, and experiences,
That's really key to making sure the receiver gets the message.
it's like tailoring the message to fit the person you're talking to.
Exactly. Now we've got these 3 pillars, which is a great foundation,
Uh-huh.
but things don't always go smoothly.
What do you mean?
There can be barriers that mess up the communication process.
Oh, like obstacles that get in the way.
Yeah, in the handbook, it points out 4 main ones.
4. Okay.
And it says the first one is often the biggest hurdle,
All right. I'm curious. What is it?
a lack of common experience.
Lack of common experience. So like if the instructor and student come from totally different backgrounds.
It's more than that. It's about how we think words have this fixed meaning.
Oh, I see. Like we assume everyone understands words the same way.
But the reality is, words trigger responses based on our own experiences.
That's a good point.
Like if Carol says the word yaw,
Yeah. Okay.
someone who doesn't know anything about aviation,
Yeah.
they might think of a boat turning.
Yeah. Or a dog yawning.
The meaning isn't automatically the same for everyone.
So it's not just about the word itself, but the context.
Exactly.
Mm.
The handbook uses the word tractor as an example.
Tractor. Okay.
A farmer, a truck driver, and a pilot.
Uh-huh.
They'll all picture different things when they hear that word.
Right. Different types of tractors.
So the instructor needs to speak the learner's language.
That makes sense. You have to meet them where they are.
And if Carol needs to use a technical term like magneto-timing,
Magneto-timing.
okay, she can't just assume Jacob knows what that means.
She has to explain it clearly.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And this is especially important when someone's learning in a second language.
Oh, that adds another layer of complexity.
The FAA actually has guidelines on this.
Does it really?
They say having a good grasp of English is really important for safety.
I can see why that would be crucial.
But even when everyone's speaking the same language, making sure everyone understands the basic terms,
That's super important.
it's absolutely crucial.
So that's the first barrier, lack of common experience. What's the second one?
The second barrier is confusion between the symbol and what it stands for.
Okay, that sounds a bit complicated.
Basically, it reminds us that words aren't the things themselves.
I think I get it.
Like, think about when people call an aviation maintenance technician a mechanic.
Right.
They both work on machines, but a licensed AMT, they've got specific training skills and responsibilities.
So calling them just a mechanic doesn't do them justice.
It can lead to people misunderstanding what they can actually do.
That makes sense. So the word mechanic doesn't fully represent the actual person.
Exactly. And then there's the barrier of overusing abstractions.
Abstractions.
Those are general terms that don't create a clear picture in your mind.
Okay, like what?
The handbook compares a broad term like aircraft with more specific examples like a Boeing 777 or a Piper Cub.
I see. So one is vague, the others are precise.
If Carol just says aircraft engine,
Right.
Jacob might picture a huge jet engine, while someone else might picture a small propeller engine.
Even say propeller engine doesn't tell you enough.
Exactly. Is it a radial engine or an inline engine?
You need more detail.
Using more concrete terms like Lycoming IO360.
That paints a clearer picture.
But only if the learner knows what that means.
So it depends on their existing knowledge.
The handbook does say that abstract concepts like aerodynamics, they can be useful as a framework,
Right.
but they need to be linked to real-world examples.
I see.
Like if someone's landing poorly and the instructor just says, take appropriate measures,
That's too vague.
it's much better to say, execute a go-around.
Yeah, that's a specific action.
Same with torquing bolts.
Instead of saying torque them to the proper values.
You need to be specific and say, follow the procedures in the aircraft maintenance manual.
So basically be as clear and concrete as possible.
Exactly. And the fourth category of barriers.
Okay, what's that?
It covers external factors.
External factors, like things outside the actual conversation.
Yeah, things that can interfere with communication.
Interesting. What kinds of things?
They can be physiological, environmental, or psychological.
Okay, break those down for me.
Physiological factors. Those are things like hearing problems or even a temporary illness.
Right, those could make it hard to focus.
The handbook also mentions multitasking as a physiological barrier.
Multitasking? How so?
It says that constantly switching between tasks actually makes people understand and perform worse.
I can see that, trying to do too many things at once.
Environmental factors, that's the physical surroundings.
Right.
Like in aviation, the noise in a cockpit could be a big problem.
That's why pilots wear headsets.
It's not just about protecting their hearing, it's also about being able to hear each other clearly.
Noise canceling.
And then in helicopters, the vibrations can also make communication harder.
I bet.
And then there are the psychological factors.
Psychological, like what?
Those are things like anxiety,
Right.
lack of trust, or even lack of commitment.
So if Jacob's nervous about his first tailwheel takeoff,
Yeah.
he might not be able to focus on what Carol's saying.
Or if Carol isn't fully engaged in teaching,
Right.
it will affect how well Jacob learns.
That makes a lot of sense. Emotions can really get in the way.
So with all these potential barriers, it's not surprising that messages can get distorted.
Distorted, like garbled.
The handbook calls this interference.
Interference.
It's when the original message changes unintentionally.
So like a game of telephone,
Kind of.
but with serious consequences.
Exactly. And this interference can come from all sorts of things.
Like what?
Background noise, those external factors we talked about, even people's emotional states.
I see.
The key takeaway here is how important feedback and confirmation are.
Feedback and confirmation. Why is that so crucial?
Well, just because Carol thinks she explained something clearly
Right.
doesn't mean Jacob understood it the way she meant it.
So she needs to check.
Exactly. She could ask Jacob to explain it back to her.
To see if he really gets it.
Or watch him try a procedure.
To make sure he's doing it right.
This feedback loop helps catch misunderstandings early on.
And it's not just the instructor giving feedback.
You're right. Learners need feedback too,
From the instructor.
to know how they're doing.
So positive feedback to boost their confidence.
And constructive negative feedback.
To help them improve.
But it needs to be given privately and respectfully.
Yeah, you don't want to discourage them.
The good news is that communication is a skill.
Okay, so you can get better at it.
And like any skill, it improves with practice.
Makes sense. The more you do it, the better you get.
The handbook talks about how instructor training often includes role-playing.
Role-playing. That's interesting.
They actually practice their communication skills by pretending to be in different situations.
Oh, like mock teaching scenarios?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like a flight instructor applicant might do a fake lesson,
With someone pretending to be a student.
and the experienced instructor would act like a nervous student.
Oh, that's smart.
Mm-hmm.
That would help the applicant practice staying calm and clear.
And they can get feedback in a safe environment.
So it's like a dress rehearsal before the real thing.
And people training to be maintenance instructors, they might practice giving technical instructions.
Under the watchful eye of a mentor.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the FAA is really emphasizing scenario-based training now.
Scenario-based training. What is that?
They call it SBT.
SBT. Okay.
It's all about practical application.
So instead of just memorizing facts and procedures,
Right.
learners actually get to apply what they've learned in realistic situations.
The handbook gives an example of a flight instructor applicant named James.
James. Okay.
He's setting up a simulated stall scenario
A stall scenario.
for Ray, who's an experienced instructor, pretending to be the student.
So Ray's acting like a typical student.
Yeah, maybe a bit anxious. This James guy, he has to brief Ray on the maneuver.
Demonstrate it and then talk Ray through doing it himself.
That's a great way to practice.
It helps prepare future instructors for the real world.
And it reinforces their own understanding, too.
The handbook also highlights how important it is for instructors to speak with knowledge and confidence.
That makes sense. If Carol really knows her stuff about tailwheel takeoffs,
Yeah.
she'll be better at explaining it to Jacob.
And using personal experiences as examples can be really helpful too.
But that's a good point. It makes things more relatable.
Like if Carol has experienced that yawing tendency herself,
Right.
sharing that story can make it more vivid for Jacob.
But the handbook warns against turning those stories into long war stories.
Yeah, it's all about balance.
The focus should stay on the learning objectives.
And in the end, Carol needs a way to see if Jacob has actually learned.
Like a test.
It could be watching him fly, or seeing if he can do a maintenance procedure correctly.
We're even asking him to explain the concepts.
But it's not just about whether he can do it.
It's about understanding why.
Exactly, like why a certain fastener needs to be torqued a specific way.
Right, or why maintaining certain airspeeds is so important.
When you understand the why,
you're more likely to do it right.
And you can adapt better in different situations.
So understanding is key.
And, effective communication, it's not just about talking and explaining.
There's more to it.
It's also about listening and asking good questions.
Oh, right. Listening is crucial.
The handbook defines listening as hearing with comprehension.
Hearing with comprehension. So it's not just about the sounds, but about understanding.
And instructors, they need to be active listeners.
What does that mean exactly?
It means really paying attention, showing that you're engaged.
And not interrupting.
There are techniques they can use to improve their listening skills.
So it's something you can work on.
And learners, they need to be good listeners too.
So it's a two-way street.
They need to want to listen.
And there's things they can do to get better at it.
Like managing their emotions.
Right.
Focusing on the main ideas.
Right.
Avoiding distractions.
Like daydreaming.
And taking notes.
Yeah, it helps you remember.
That point about emotions is really important.
In what way?
If Jacob's really anxious about his first tailwheel takeoff, he might have trouble focusing on Carol's explanations.
So anxiety can be a barrier.
It's important for both the instructor and the learner to recognize those emotional barriers.
And then there's the skill of asking questions.
Right, asking good questions is so important.
How so?
Well, the handbook talks about the difference between focused open-ended questions and closed-ended questions.
Like yes or no questions.
Open-ended questions often start with why or how.
Right. They encourage people to explain their thinking.
And they reveal a deeper understanding.
So Carol could use those to see how well Jacob understands the material.
And the questions should be tailored to Jacob's experience level.
So don't ask him something way over his head.
And focus on one idea at a time.
So he doesn't get overwhelmed.
The handbook also talks about confirming understanding.
Confirming understanding, so making sure everyone's on the same page.
Through things like paraphrasing.
Paraphrasing, okay.
Carol could repeat what Jacob just said.
In her own words.
To make sure she understood him correctly.
And that gives Jacob a chance to clear up any confusion.
And she could also check in on Jacob's emotional state.
How would she do that?
By saying something like, "You seem a little apprehensive about this maneuver."
That opens the door for him to talk about his feelings.
And then the final point they make.
I'm listening.
Is that instructors and anyone who wants to communicate effectively,
right,
they should never stop learning.
That makes sense. Knowledge is power.
The more you know, the better you can explain things to others.
And the more confident you'll feel.
Even experienced instructors.
They can always learn something new.
They should always be looking for ways to improve their communication.
So it's a continuous process.
So to recap quickly, we've looked at the 3 core elements of effective communication.
The source, the symbols, and the receiver.
And we've talked about the barriers that can get in the way.
Like lack of shared experience and distractions.
And the hope is that by understanding these principles,
especially how they're used in aviation,
you'll be better at communicating your own ideas.
And at understanding what others are trying to tell you.
No matter what the subject is.
So it's about being a better communicator overall.
Exactly. Now, for our final thought. I want you to think about a time when communication broke down.
Okay.
Maybe you were trying to explain something to someone.
Or maybe I was trying to understand something.
Thinking back on that situation, what barrier might have been at play?
I see.
And how could the communication have been handled differently?
To get a better outcome.
It's something to ponder.
Food for thought.
Thanks for joining our deep dive today.
Until next time.